Welcome to Mysterious Goings On. We're going to get right to the show after these messages.
Hi, this is Michelle Cox. I'm the author of the Henrietta and Inspector Howard series, and you're listening to Mysterious Goings On.
You know, W.H. Auden said that thousands have lived without love, but not one without water. And we live on a planet that is, what is it, 3/4 covered by water. But here's the rub. It's beautiful, and you can sail on it. You can do plenty of things, but you can't drink all of it. That, I think, as we look forward to the next millennium for mankind, is going to be at the center, I think, of a lot of potentially extinctive issues for us as a species. And that's why I'm very excited to speak with a novelist who really understands and can describe beautifully in her book about where we are, the potential perils of where we are with our water supply as humans. And that is why Nina Munteanu is with us. She is a Canadian ecologist and internationally published novelist of science fiction and fantasy. In addition to 8 published novels, she has written award-nominated short stories, articles in nonfiction books, which have been translated into several languages throughout the world. Recognition for her work includes the Midwest Book Review Reader's Choice Award, finalist for Forward Magazine's Book of the Year Award, the SLF Fountain Award, and the Delta Optimist Reviewer's Choice. Nina is a member of the Writers' Union of Canada and SF Canada. She regularly publishes reviews and essays in magazines such as the New York Review of Science Fiction and Strange Horizons. She serves as staff writer for several online and print magazines and was assistant editor-in-chief of Imagicon, a Romanian speculative magazine. She currently writes for Amazing Stories. She's also editor for Ego Publishing House in Romania and Europa SF, a zine dedicated to informing the European SF community. Nina hosts the Age of Water podcast with co-host Claudia Mergen. It's a podcast devoted, as you might guess, to exploring water and environmental issues. They also do monthly interviews with scientists, visionaries, authors of eco-fiction, and technologists on matters of the environment, climate change, and what we are doing to make a difference. You know what? I cannot wait to hear, drop by drop, what Nina has to say about water, fiction, and more. Nina, welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be here.
So, water. I don't expect you to tell us every detail of your journey to becoming an ecologist, but not everybody grows up wanting to be an ecologist. I'd love to know what inspired you.
Wow. Ecology and limnology. Those are kind of 2 different stories, but I was always interested somehow as a kid in basically in ecology and the environment. I used to play outside all the time in the forest with my older brother and sister. I was the youngest, the tag along, right? Come on, come on over here. Okay, sit over there, do this, be the table, and we'll do the, you know how little kids are. Anyway, right. But we would go outside in the forest behind our house, and it was a glorious forest. I grew up in Quebec, Eastern Townships. Maple Beach, gorgeous Maple Beach, hardwood forest, mixed forest, and we would play games and we would tell stories. Essentially, I was a storyteller from a little kid on, and we would make magic potions and all kinds of stuff and weave a whole story around it. We had casts of 1,000 characters that would, do things, right? Action, adventure, that sort of stuff. And it just grew from there. The interest in water is a different story. I was actually scared of water, and as a kid, I couldn't swim. That was part of the reason. I just had these thoughts of drowning. So my older brother and sister, they would go out and cavort in the water. They were always arguing and dunking each other and stuff. And I would stay on shore and study it. Like Da Vinci. Da Vinci was a studier of water. He drew it. He drew it. It looked like hair. It looked, how it flowed, the vortexes and all these types of patterns that water forms, the surging waves, etc. And so I turned my fear literally into a fascination. Oh, and I learned how to swim. That was important too, right? So that next thing you know, I'm a limnologist. I made it into a career, and I just jumped in boats and zoomed around lakes and rivers and studied the water, and always felt this connection, deep abiding connection with it.
Da Vinci, he kept notebooks, and I think one of them was one of his to-do list was to study the woodpecker's tongue. I'm not sure if
Whoa.
he ever did.
Oh, he studied all kinds of things, that man. He was amazing.
He did. But that, I think that's why when you mentioned Da Vinci and you talk about what you're the limnologist, and I'm going to confess that I consider myself fairly well read. As obviously I even knew about the woodpecker's tongue incident, but I have never heard when I hear limnologist, I think of limner, like lim. That's light. Now, is that similar, or what are we talking about here?
Very close. Yeah. Well, it actually comes from limnos, the Greek for water. Actually, limnosology, the study of fresh water. So it's basically limnos, as opposed to other people thinking when they hear limnology, they think limb, as in the study of limbs, anatomy and such. So it's interesting that you bring in the word light. So there's got to be some kind of connection, some other kind of connection there. But yeah, that's its root. Limnos meaning water.
I'm going to look into limner, because I remember when I was a very young writer, I wrote something. It was a short story called Limner, and it was about, and it had to do. It was a terminology of light and shadow. Maybe all I know, it could have been something else, but and I am old, so my memory is starting to fail me on this. But fascinating. So limnologist is the thing in Canada, of course, and it has incredible bodies of water, and I think most Americans, at least the ones I know, we all believe that, though we're sure it does have its endangered areas with pollution, etc. We believe that Canada, and you will of course disabuse me of this notion, I believe that Canada has got these very pristine spaces compared to most places in the world. And actually, I believe it also probably has one of the largest supplies of fresh water in the world. Yep. Right or wrong on both counts?
Right on both counts. But here's the rub. It's not because we're particularly good at preserving it. We're preservationists or conservationists. It's simply because we're so scarce ourselves compared to the area of the country. The country is huge, as is the U.S. The difference is the population, right? We have about a tenth of your population, if that.
It's about 40 million or so, something like
that. And we're all concentrated in the lower part, and the boreal zone, consisting of the boreal forest and other vegetation associated with the boreal zone, is all is very scarcely populated, and therefore more pristine, at least on a local level. So the huge lakes there, and riverways and water bodies that are not touched by us because we're simply not there. The indigenous folk, on the other hand, are all over, but they are a whole different, almost like a whole different species, need I say. They are in tune with their environment. There's a huge difference. We don't have to go into that as much, but so the bottom line is, where we have these huge spaces simply because humanity or settler people have not gone there and just cut all the forests down and everything else. So the water bodies are more intact.
So it strikes me, as I may have been implied at the beginning of the show, that Canada, I think, will one day, if not sooner than later, be a major player in the world. As we are seeing with climate change, we're going to see massive I think massive migrations and massive battles over natural resources, not the least of which being water. Is that something? And I promise we're getting to your book there. That I take
Oh
the long
yeah,
way.
that's a
Can you
segue to
tell?
it.
There you go. So, just wondering then, Nina. I'll just leave the question right there. What do you think? Is Canada someday going to be a battleground, or is it going to be a powerhouse because of this, or what do you foresee in your work?
Wow. You just created that divergence there. Which one is it? And it depends entirely on our people and our government and how we uh, essentially respond to the pressures by other jurisdictions, other countries, and the world generally. Canada has the potential to literally be the wetland of the world. And what I mean by that is as to steward the water that comes to Canada, comes through Canada. The water cycle, of course, is global, right? We have the
Right.
hydrological cycle that cycles water from the air through the oceans, through the rivers, fresh water, etc. There's a continual renewal of the water that's here. Water's been here for a long time. It's basically the same. The same amount of water basically exists on a planet from the time of the dinosaurs, when the dinosaurs quenched their thirst in the Triassic. I mean, that's the same water, Think of it. And it just cycles all around the planet. We lose a little bit to space, but we also gain a little bit through comets, etc., that drop water off because water's in the entire universe, right? Which is also very cool. But anyway, to go back to that, so Canada or any of the land bases serve as a temporary, if you will, a temporary place, like a hotel for water, right? The water comes in, it spends a little time there. Oh, here's a spa here. We like to spend more time, like a reservoir. I shouldn't say reservoir. There's problems with reservoirs in a lake, right? So spend time more in a lake. There's a spa. We want to spend time there, and all lakes have what's called a water retention, a water storage capacity, right? So water will stay there longer, like the Great Lakes, and then keep moving on. Water's always flowing, always moving. So the concept of owning water is one of our problems. And in fact, nobody owns the water. We don't own anything, really. We can discuss that too. That's political, right? But in a practical sense, we don't own it. We can't hang on to it forever. As you mentioned earlier, water is a perfect example, an archetype, if you will, of flow, of the need to let go, accept and let go. If you think of it even in terms of a way of thinking, a worldview even. So Canada, to go back to Canada and your initial question, is a steward, is a repository for a large proportion of the water that comes and goes. And one of the reasons is because we have all these glaciers there and large lakes that act to keep that water there for longer than, let's say, in a river, or if it just falls on the ground and then evaporates away through the trees, evapotranspiration. So water spends more time there. And because of that, what we do with that water, whether we do it responsibly or whether we do it irresponsibly, is an important aspect. So I'm not going to go into politics or anything like that because I don't really want to. We could get into a huge discussion about that, but the choice is there, and you're very right. I think it becomes it. Having said that, I'm not going to go into politics. It does become a political issue. It is political.
Yeah.
The reality is. Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. But you made this wonderful point that we don't own the water, but we, as nations, do own the access to water.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, right. And in your book, Diary of the Age of Water, there is a geopolitical issue here. As I believe you said, China owns the U.S. and U.S. owns Canada. Is that about right?
Yeah.
So I'll be quiet. Tell us about the book. We don't have to go, specifically political, but tell us the setting if you don't mind. It's fascinating.
Okay, I will just a little, but I want people to read the book. So
Oh,
that's an
no, I don't want you
intrigue.
to give it all away.
Yeah, yeah, that's an intriguing feature, and it gets people right as soon as you say that, which is why I said it like that. I think in the blurb, it's in one of the blurbs. It gets people thinking, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
how can that be possible? What does that really mean? Does that mean that you know?" So it's, I guess to say it in a nutshell, it is based on real precedents, real premise, the premise based on real events, water wars, water jurisdictions, things that are going on right now between other countries, and the current scenario between China and the States, trade issues, everything else that's going on, the debt, huge debt of certain countries to other countries, et cetera, et cetera. We're all in debt, right? And who are we in debt to? And who calls in what debt to who, et cetera, comes down to that sort of scenario. And I played around with some interesting possibilities in this book, and in how they played out. Essentially, is how I'm going to explain it.
Right, and it looks fascinating, and you've got the water twins. So tell us, if you would, about who were the protagonists of the story.
Okay, I'll step back a little bit because there's essentially the story showcases 4 generations of women,
Okay.
And their unique relationship to water. So they're all related to each other. So first of all, there's the main character is in fact the limnologist diarist, the diary, the one who creates the diary. And on either side of that, so that's embedded in the story. But the story actually begins with the last generation, now a being, a water being, in fact, with 4 arms, and she's a blue water being. Her name's Kyo. And she's in the dying boreal forest, and we don't know exactly when, but we gather it's in the far future sometime. And she is being inducted into what's called the Exodus, and she has to prepare for that. And we don't know what the Exodus is yet. Anyway, I'm not going to tell you either. So you have to read about all this. So
read the book.
Right. So in doing so, she has to go to the library and prepare herself. And she discovers this diary from the time, which is the near future right now, 2020 onward into the 2060s, by this limnologist. And that's one of the characters, obviously. So the diary itself showcases her own thoughts, the diarist, and her mother, who is an activist, a water activist. And as I've already mentioned, the diarist is a limnologist.
Right.
And then there's her daughter, who she protects. She's overprotective of, because she felt, because of her mother was an activist, she felt abandoned. So she's overprotective. It's natural inclination. And of course, what happens? Her daughter becomes an activist too. It's always like that, right? With kids, if you have kids or not. But anyway, we try our best, right? And so there's that kind of interaction between the generations, but also it explains their relationship with water as well, being unique for them. And then of course it moves on back to the far future. And so the diary is actually nested in a larger story that you might say is metaphorically about humanity, humankind's own journey. So it's all about little micro journeys connected to water, and our larger journey, again, connected to water.
Yeah, and all the reviews are indicative that it's a beautiful story, well told, and of course you're going to leave this story thinking about our relationship to water. And so I wanted to ask you then, as an ecologist, as a limnologist, did you start out? And again, if this is too inane of a question, you can dodge it and answer some other question. Did you start out though as an ecologist, limnologist, and say, I need to express these issues about water that I am so devoted to, and I need to find a vehicle? Or was it more of the case of I'm a writer, always have been, used to do little plays, radio plays with my siblings when I was little, and I wrote all the scripts and directed? Was it that person, or was it just a thing that came together all at once? It was like, I'm going to take my passion in the real world, I'm going to fictionalize to try to share it with people in an entertaining fashion.
That's a great question. And of course, it's all of them, sort of both. Can't really separate those because that's all me. But yeah,
Mm,
as a limnologist, I'll just start with that because that's sort of how it really went. I always wanted, I've been an limnologist for about 25 years or so, maybe more. So I always wanted to help people understand and appreciate water. And one way, this is the lay public, right, who aren't
mhm,
scientists.
right.
So one way was to create an entertaining but informative layman's textbook. So on water, a biography of water, if you will. So, I
Hmm.
mean, I finally did that in 2016. I came out with Water Is, a publication that actually received much acclaim. In fact, it even got a nod from Margaret Atwood,
Ooh,
environmentalist herself. Yeah, she talked about it in the New York Times, which was great. Um,
nice.
so, fresh from that endeavor, I kind of felt compelled to write my next novel about water. And it didn't come about right away. In the meantime, I was asked to write a short story by my publisher in Rome. And I wanted to basically write something that was geopolitical about water. They wanted something that was environmental. So I, I was always thinking about the ironies in Canada, Canada being a water-rich heritage. And
Hmm.
so the premise that I wanted to explore was the irony of people in a water-rich nation experiencing water scarcity. I mean,
Yeah,
that's an interesting possibility, right? So living under a government-imposed daily water quota of 5 liters a day, while meantime, bottling companies and utility companies are taking it for other purposes, right? So that's how
right.
you literally create this water scarcity scenario. So the story was called A Way of Water, The Way of Water, and it was published by Menzioni Edizioni in Italy, and then it went all over the place. It kind of went viral, was picked up by a number of anthologies. So it was about a young woman in near future Toronto who's run out of water credits for the public WTAP. By this time, houses no longer have potable water and their water taps have been cemented shut, not unlike what happened not too long ago in Detroit for people who couldn't pay their water tax, right?
Yeah.
So, so she's standing basically 2 meters from water in a line. She's standing in line waiting, and she's dying of thirst. And so
Oh,
there's that irony, right? And you don't know
oh,
what happens, but anyway. So the other spark, so that character becomes the daughter in this book. So the other thing that's kind of sparked it, so it's always like that. That's how ideas for books come about. I mean, like you say, I'm a writer, so I pick up on these things, and then suddenly it reaches a point of not more than inspiration, a kind of there's a word for that. It sparks it all together, and then next thing you know, you have something going on. So the next spark of inspiration came when I attended a talk in Toronto by Maud Barlow with the Council of Canadians. And it's based on her book, Boiling Point, which is about the current water crisis in Canada. Again, an
hmm,
irony, right? People don't think
right.
of that, but it's true. If
Yeah.
you read her book, it's amazingly, well, it's very telling anyway. So my attention was caught by a young mother and her 6-year-old girl. She may have been even younger than that, sitting in the balcony. This was done in a church. Maud Barlow was talking in a church, which was great. So I thought, what kind of mother would take her little girl to a political talk on water in Canada? So the diarist character, Lina, is the little girl, and her mother, Una, were born. And that sparked the story. I had my story now. So you see how it works? It's really cool. So what it is the idea percolates. And as a limnologist and as an ecologist, I'm always thinking of those elements. I consider myself an eco-fiction writer and climate fiction writer now. I didn't used to, but now that brand is out there, those words are out there. So I've, and that's what most of my stories are about. And then an incident or something that I capture will spark that. It's almost like it's an incendiary, right? You've got this smoldering fire. It's almost sort of how to make a fire, right? You've got all the tinder pieces, you've got the sticks and everything put together and the paper even, but you need that something to light it up, right? And that usually comes from some kind of a personal experience, an inspirational type thing. In some cases, in one case for a story, it came from a picture or a painting that someone had created, and it just required that thinking, and it sparked a story from it. So anyway, that's how it came about.
The most glorious moments as a writer are when those things strike or they're observed. And I told this story once before. I've been stuck on something for my latest book I'm finishing up now, and I was mowing the grass, and I don't know where it came from, and it had nothing to do with mowing the grass, but I think it was just the fact that I stopped thinking about it and I focused just on being mindless and mowing the grass, and then boom, I stopped the mower in the yard, ran inside, and wrote it down, and boom.
I love that.
Everything's working.
Julia Cameron, I don't know if you know her book, The Artist's Way. She writes about something similar to that, but she talks about the S things, the S activities that put us into that. I don't know what to call it, that way of thinking where our brain is one part is shut off so that the other part can roam, but we're still doing something. And the reason she uses S is just, it was arbitrary. So steering, as in driving, steering, strolling, showering. Think of all the S words in terms of doing something that's sort of routine. I was trying to think of an S word that covers what you were doing.
Shopping.
Yeah. Mowing. Well, mowing starts with an M, but you know what I'm saying, right?
Right.
When we get into these things, going for a walk in nature, right? All these types of activities that are, I guess, they require some physicality, so that part of our brain is occupied with the physicality, so that the upper conscious part is occupied that way, allowing the subconscious to roam freely. It has to be some kind of routine activity that doesn't fully occupy us. And I kind of wonder about the steering part. We really should be paying attention to the road properly, but I guess, if you're going on a same trip all the time, you could do that, right? And I get lots of my ideas that way.
Absolutely. So there you go, writers. Don't try so hard is the lesson I'm gleaning from this. Don't force it. As we wrap up here, Nina, I wanted to ask you though, is it burdensome being a limnologist? Like, do you ever sit down at a restaurant? I don't know if they do this where you live, but here in the States at a nicer restaurant, they'll just automatically put down a glass of water in front of you before you even order. Is there a burden to constantly thinking about water? I mean, if somebody put that proverbial glass of water in front of you, are you looking at that water and thinking about, why did they give me this water I didn't order? This is a waste of water, or maybe, I needed that water. How did they know? I'm just curious. How does your mind work when it comes to that?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because there's a balance, and it comes down to the need for balance too. And I have to constantly grapple with that myself, because yes, it is. I do feel it as a burden sometimes. It's like knowledge, right? The more you know, the more responsible you pretty much have to be based on what you know, which is, I'm guessing, one reason why we seek ignorance on purpose. or subconsciously, so that we don't have to know, so we don't have to behave responsibly considering that we know. Having said that, once you know, that's it, right? So then
Right.
how do you deal with that balance? And I have the same problem when I'm walking in the forest or in a path or in a park and I see littering.
Ugh.
I have a real pet peeve for that. And how do I shut off my brain if I'm not picking up the litter, which I tend to do actually? I'll just pick it up and that's it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and it does annoy me. So I don't have an answer to that. I mean, the answer, I guess, is that I do grapple with it. I go back and forth, and it depends on my mood of the day, depends on other elements that come into play, but I am constantly seeking the balance. And what I have to do is tell myself sometimes that here's a moment where I could enlighten somebody, educate them, and I often take that role. I will say, I would prefer not that you don't do that, and I'll tell them why.
Right.
So I have no problem with confrontations, and that doesn't have to be a confrontation. It can be a moment of a teaching moment. And I mean, my background is in teaching, and I am a teacher. And I find that if I don't do that, then I feel a bit more rankled. If I do express myself and educate and help with awareness, which is really part of why I write in the first place, then I feel better, and the person can take that information and do something with it or not. That's up to them, right? But then I have done what I feel is the best. So action is always good, but coming from a good place is important as well. So that's the part that I have to learn.
Well, I'm with you know. It's funny you say that. We have a kind of a road abutting our property. We have a fence, but people, it's one of those roads where people just dump garbage. I don't mean like big trucks loads of it. I just mean they throw a lot of bottles, a lot of little plastic booze bottles, little waste. And so the other day, it was a warm day, first one of the spring, and I just took my recycling container and I went out there and I picked up all the glass and I picked up all the trash, separated it, and it was I filled up a whole container, and then I filled up half a trash bag. And the thing that made me feel good, just because it's where I live, but lots of cars drove by and saw me do that, and I'm just hoping, Nina, that some of them are going to drop by and go, wow, actual people live there and don't necessarily want me dumping my crap on the side of the road. Hoping.
And that's exactly it. And you will never know, but there's that part of you deep down that does know that it does make a difference, even if it's one person. And that's how it works. By showing, then the others will respond in kind. And in fact, just to speak to the littering again, they've proven that when an area is cleaned up, it's less likely to be littered again. I mean, literally. So
is that right?
Yes, it is. So you're doing two things at the same time. You're cleaning up and people are seeing you do it. I've done this as well. I literally took on one section of a stream that goes through a gorgeous part of, a little road goes through there. And they have to stop because it's a one-lane bridge, and everybody who stops to just throw their stuff, right? So there's gobs of litter right there. And I hated it because every time I go there, I used to go there all the time just to be with nature. So I wanted it clean for me, to be honest. So I took it on, and I would just stop there and pick up litter. I took it a step further. I had a little flyer that I wrote up about why it's so bad, why litter is so bad to the streams and all that kind of stuff. And because the cars had to stop, I could run up and give them the flyer. and so many of them thanked me. Some rolled up their window real fast so I couldn't get to them. But most of them were, themselves apologetic or said, yeah, they rooted for me. And in the meantime, of course, otherwise I was just picking up the litter and people would see me do it. And believe me, believe me, that makes a difference. It makes an impact. You never know how much it does, but you know it will. So the very action of doing it and then seeing it clean, people are less likely to throw into it. Know that that's the truth as well.
Yeah.
So
Well,
every individual can make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Not to put too fine a point on it, but one of my heroes, Robert F. Kennedy, said each time a man or a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope, and I think that each of us have tiny ripples we can make there. And I think Nina, I think you are doing this. Okay, here's the big question. Where can everybody go to find out more about you and to buy your book?
They could just go to the internet and type up my name because it's so unique. There's few of me. Okay, so that's number one, Nina Munteanu. The other place is my websites. I have a couple. There's ninamunteanu.ca, which is about me and my writing. ninamunteanu.me, which is about my coaching and my, again, writing tips for writers, would-be writers, etc. Has a lot of, it's a blog, so it has a lot of really good articles in there. Then about me and water is themeaningofwater.com. And that's all about water issues, those types of things. A lot of, again, really good articles, informative articles on limnology and water issues and just water generally in science. In terms of this particular book, you can go for A Diary in the Age of Water, which is, again, has a lot of good information on water and tells a really good story. So I've been told. Can be obtained through Amazon. All the Amazons of the world are carrying it, it seems. You can also get it through the publisher themselves, Inanna Publications in Toronto.
And folks, of course, you didn't have to scribble all that down because it's all going to be in the show notes. Just look for it in the show notes wherever you get your pod, or just go to mgopod.com. Nina Munteanu, I could have spoken for another hour. I think this is so fascinating what you're doing. I love the way you are blending two incredible things together. One is teaching us and telling us and sharing with us your passion for the ecology, and the other is telling a ripping good story, which is the important part for readers too, right? So thank you so very much for joining us here on Mysterious Goings On.
Thank you so much, Alex. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for listening to Mysterious Goings On. Don't forget, we have a complete archive of all of our interviews, monologues, updates, live readings, dead readings. All of that stuff is available at mgopod.com. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to us so you never miss an episode. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all the usual suspects. Please join us there. Again, don't forget, mgopod.com also has links where to find me on social media and how to get in touch in case you want to be a guest here on the show. Well, I think it's time that I move on for this week, but until next time, keep reading.